Right guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. You could not ask for a much better setup to tomorrow's championship decider. The top three in the title fight, the top three on the grid for tomorrow's Grand Prix. Verstappen and Red Bull, they do the job, getting on pole position where Max is likely to win the race from there. But he says he will need some help from the McLaren boys behind. George Russell not quite getting amongst the McLarens as he was hoping to do. Max may well have some tactics up his sleeve, as may will Yuki Tsunoda, if Red Bull want to still win this championship tomorrow. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We have so much to get into today. We're going to start here. A couple of things going on. F1 are likely planning something kind of interesting for tomorrow because it's remarkable that of the three title contenders, they have all won 7 Grand Prix each this season. Tomorrow, for one of them, that will likely become 8. But if it's Max, that's not necessarily going to be enough. Now, apparently, according to some rumours, they may have brought all of the trophies for this year or something like that to the final Grand Prix. There's going to be some glitz. There's going to be some glab. There's going to be some entertainment value on offer tomorrow, that is for sure. F1, they're frothing at the mouth knowing that there is a title decider going down to the final rounds, and the fact that all the three contenders are up there makes things rather spicy indeed. Now, free practice is very interesting. I think Red Bull were always going to make some sort of progress overnight. The key question was, could they gain enough in the third sector? They were always going to be faster in the first couple of sectors, but that McLaren was mighty in the final part of the lap, and that was causing issues for Max in terms of trying to challenge a pole. Interestingly enough, in FP3, the fastest lap time belongs to none other than the Mercedes of George Russell, so it looked very much like he was going to be in the game as well. But Max just found so much time in these final couple of qualifying laps that we'll get into in a second, and Russell gave it a good go, but it was not quite enough in the end. Now, this was another very controversial moment today. So here comes Lando Norris in free practice. He's on a hot lap. This is Yuki Tsunoda, who stays to the right and then decides that he was going to come to the left, and, well, if Lando took the racing line, he would have crashed. Lando had to get out of the way. Massive high-speed moment like this was really scary and dangerous. Now, interesting, because yesterday, Lando had another near enough impeding moment in free practice at turn 1. That was Max in the way. GP had told him, oh, I think Lando's coming through. Oh, it doesn't look like he is. Oh, no, sorry, he actually is. Now, this is nothing malicious from Yuki, but he was clearly not told on his radio that Lando was coming, certainly not that he was coming at pace. And it just makes you wonder, not to say there's any grand conspiracy here, but of the two key impeding incidents we have seen so far this weekend, apart from Browning or Hadja in free practice 1, it's been Lando nearly running into the back of a Red Bull. So is it just a coincidence, or a Red Bull trying to play some games on the radio with their communication, not telling their drivers that Lando's on a hot lap? I don't know, but whatever it was, we know that Red Bull will play these games, and they certainly will be playing some games tomorrow. Now, they were fined 10,000 euros for this. Yuki got a warning. Again, it's free practice. You're not going to get a penalty for this. Yuki had quite the day today, and, well, we'll talk about this in a second. Let's talk, though, about the other thing that happened in F3 which was Hamilton crashing out. It's very interesting, actually, to see what happened today with Ferrari, because they were running their car very low. And there was a time in free practice where Hamilton was P1, then he was only a couple of tenths off. He was doing a pretty good lap here. He was only about a tenth off Max after the first 2 sectors. But you can see, if you just look at the, look at the floor of Hamilton's car, how much, like, it's bouncing here, right? They're running the car very low. I'm not going to say plank wear. I have already said it, but basically what I'm trying to say is, after tomorrow's Grand Prix is over, let's just wait until the classification is secured and the scrutineers have done their job, right? Because these guys are running the car low. Max was complaining in FP3 as well about the bouncing of the car and the challenge. They're chasing hundreds of performance and they're running the car close to the ground. They no longer have the flexi wing that they can use to mitigate some of these issues. So Ferrari also did the same thing. They clearly lowered their car. You can see Hamilton's bouncing around here through the corner, and as a result of that, you can actually even see the back tyre, like his rear right tyre here. You can see how it's compressing under the load of the bouncing, and that means that, well, his rear raises up a little bit, he loses the rear under bouncing, and he slams it into the barriers. Wasn't the worst crash ever. He actually went in forwards, damaged the front suspension, obviously going to knock his confidence for qualifying as well, and he says, something buckled at the front and snapped out the rear of the car. So Hamilton, clearly that corner was a problem for him in terms of confidence for the rest of the day, and we'll get to what happened in Q1 in a second. There was this other big moment, so Antonelli nearly got released out of the pit lane and crashed into the back of Yuki Tsunoda. That didn't help Antonelli by any means at all. And again, today was a very tricky one for him in terms of qualifying. The Mercedes just wasn't really that hooked up, and it didn't have great race pace yesterday either. So it's very interesting for Max all of a sudden, right? Because I think we felt that the Mercedes, if any car is going to be in the mix, it's probably going to be the Mercedes. And it is, based on the grid that we'll discuss in the coming minutes. But Max will need a bit of luck / a bit of intervention if he is going to want to take this title tomorrow. So George Russell comes out of the pits. He crashed into Yuki's car, and Yuki's floor got damaged. And I think they had to change to an older spec of floor. So, Yuki was at that point kind of compromised. Thought it was interesting. The final run in FP3, Lando came out with some flow vids. Pretty rare you see. The final practice lap of the whole year in cars that will never be used again. The flow vids is coming out. But I think they were messing around with the rear wing, right? So I believe when we got to qualifying, there was a slight alternation in the rear wing angle that was chosen by the McLaren drivers. Lando had a bit more wing, Piastri had a little less, and that meant that Piastri was slightly faster on the straights, Norris slightly faster through the corners. It will be interesting for tomorrow's race because it will mean Lando is more of a sitting duck in a straight line, but equally he will be very tough to follow through the final part of the lap, as we have seen help before. He may look after the tyres slightly better. So, generally speaking, more wing equals better race pace. But, of course, there are plenty of caveats there, especially when dirty air comes into play. And I'm sure that Max Verstappen will be trying to throw some dirty air around tomorrow. So, the end of FP3 went as follows. Alonso was in the mix, the two Hasses are in the mix as well, and these were the sector times. So what was interesting really is that Norris and the McLarens were not really anywhere in sector 2 where the straights are important, but Lando was gaining 3/10 on anyone through the final sector. Now that was unlikely to be replicated when we got to qualifying, but that's where Verstappen and Piastri needed to make up the time. Another big boost to Max this weekend is the engine that he used in Vegas and Brazil. So they put the new spicy engine in. They didn't use it in Qatar because they were worried about reliability, but they've tested it over the last few days. They're confident it's fine, and it's quite clear that Max has a rocket ship in the back of that car. In qualifying, actually, I don't know the qualifying stats, but in FP3, he was 3 kph faster than anyone else, including his teammate on the straight, and I think that was without a tow. So Max's engine is a rocket ship, and it's clearly turned up to the absolute max. It's fresher than the others. I think it was, as a result of that, it was pretty inevitable today that Max was either going to be on pole or very close, especially if he could tidy up the third sector. So Max is always going to be a factor. It's helpful for him this weekend as well. Now, yeah, they are running that engine probably on the limit of what they can get away with, but also the McLarens, their engines are now very old, so they will need to be careful as well. Max, after qualifying today, even before, was the favourite for the race, but I think Norris and Piastri did a stellar job being where they are. We'll discuss some of the permutations in the coming minutes. So qualifying gets underway. Max goes P1. It was incredibly competitive, this qualifying session, when it comes to lap times, right? So Behrman even went P1. Piastri went behind him by 1,000th. Verstappen was 700ths behind that. Lando was then a couple of tenths down. It was absolutely all over the shop here, really. And, well, Russell then went P1 by 7,000. So you had an incredible grid on the left-hand side here. Hamilton did a good lap at this point, but, well, we'll see what happened a couple of seconds after that, because Lando and Oscar were running, as far as I understand anyway, different rear wings. So Piastri was gaining a bit more on the straights, Norris gaining a bit more through the corners, but interestingly, Piastri then came out with a mega lap, a 122.6, and this was in Q1, by the way, a 122.6. 122.6 would have been an incredibly competitive lap in the final part of qualifying, as we'll see in a second. So that was a mega lap from Oscar, like way ahead of the curve in terms of what other drivers were doing at this time. So it felt like, wow, Oscar's really found his feet, because missed FP1, he wasn't really close in FP2, FP3 was closer, and then, of course, I was going to say FP4, but for qualifying, things started to change, right? But yeah, Hamilton was eliminated again. His first couple of sectors were fine, and he just lost about 6/10 in the final sector. Again, it's pretty brutal, really. Like, Hamilton was only 2/10 off Leclerc. Like, he was 2/10 off of Leclerc, who ended up sticking at P5. But that's just how competitive the grid is and how brutal it is to drive that Ferrari right now. His final sector wasn't good. He lost about 6/10 to where he would like to have been, but the Ferrari was not good through the final sector anyway. He went a bit deep in a couple of corners. It wasn't great, but yeah, again, Hamilton eliminated. So yeah, just a disaster for him. The end of the season. It's a remarkable statistic. Obviously, there's been some hope, and maybe it will still happen. The Hamilton and that Ferrari combination maybe breaking some records, but breaking the wrong kind of records, right? As he becomes the first ever Ferrari driver to have 3 consecutive Q1 exits. Tomorrow he will need an unimaginable miracle to score another podium in his career, and of course his first of the season. So yeah, Hamilton's out. Again, the Ferrari is such a confusing car because it's not like he was really that slow compared to Leclerc, but every other team is super competitive, and the Ferrari Leclerc said that he almost crashed a few times in Q2 and he still made it through, and then the car seemingly came alive a little bit in the final part of qualifying as the track conditions continued to evolve. So all rather confusing. Verstappen, though, comes out in Q2, does a 1:22.9. He would go a lot quicker than that a few minutes later. And this was one of the advantages that he had. So this is Fernando Alonso, right? Which is hilarious to think about, really. Alonso giving him a nice tow down the straight. This was on his second lap on a used set of softs. That was actually pretty critical because the McLaren boys, they only had one new set of soft tyres for the final run in Q3. Verstappen, because he went out on another set of softs, so the same set of softs he went out on again here, and then Alonso gave him a tow. That was enough for Verstappen to get through without using another set of tyres. But Russell did go faster at this point, a 1:22.7, still slower than Oscar went in Q1, keep in mind. That was an unbelievable lap for the time. And then as things wind down, this is Ollie Behrman just missing out. I thought that, Behrman was potentially going to be a factor in Q3. That didn't happen. He missed out by 200ths to his teammate Ocon. I thought he was going to make it through, though, because of Tsunoda's track limits violation, which I thought was a track limits violation. But, we'll have a look at the screenshots in a second. Lando, though, decent lap to go third. Feel like Lando built into the session quite well. Max was on a different planet today, but Norris, given all the pressure and everything, I think he did a pretty good job handling things today, right? Because Norris was under a bit of pressure. Oscar dunked 6/10 on his head in Q1, but Norris bounced back. He felt his way through the session quite well. But look how competitive this is. I don't know if this is the most competitive Q2 session of all time, but to have a 0.367 gap, like 3.5 tenths to separate first and 15th is outrageous, like absolutely outrageous. And look at the gaps here, right? I mean, Piastri is 8th, 3 tenths back. I mean, give that another 200 on Piastri's lap, and he's down in like 13th, right? So just unbelievable level of competitiveness here. This, however, was Yuki Tsunoda at the first corner. So this was his lap. I mean, I'll just zoom in on this so you guys can see, what I'm seeing here. This is my screenshot that I took. Okay, now I know this probably isn't the perfect screenshot if I go forward or back 1 or 2 frames from here, but this is turn 1 for Yuki. On this screenshot, I think he is probably in. Now, if you fast forward about 2 frames, it looks like I don't know, it's so marginal here. And I think when it's so marginal, I think it is the correct thing to give the benefit of the doubt to the driver. Like in football, if someone is level in like an offside rule situation, if they're level, it's fine, right? In my opinion. So I don't know, man. It's actually kind of crazy, though, because that white line is thick, right? They've made it really thick to encourage this type of stuff and reduce the track limits issues. But wow, that was marginal. And this was very important, right? Because Yuki making it through was critical for Red Bull's plan to give Max a tow in the final part of qualifying, which is exactly what he did on his first lap. I'm not sure about the second lap, but the first lap, which also would have been good enough for pole for Max, Yuki gave him a nice tow, and Yuki didn't even do a lap. I find it kind of sad for Yuki in a way. He did all this good work after Antonelli damaged him and all this, did this good work getting into Q3, and then gives Max the tow, and then doesn't even get allowed to set a lap. They just sacrificed him to P10 and didn't even put a lap in because he was just there to be sacrificed for Verstappen, which is understandable, but I think it's kind of unfortunate and does mean that Yuki is in no position at all, really, to help out Max tomorrow, unless he does some sort of a 2021 Perez type shenanigans. Max, though, put in a 1:22.2, like a mega lap. His final sector was really good, and I think it was pretty clear at that point the McLarens were not going to be able to touch that. Again, if you put a brand new fresh engine in the back of Norris and Piastri, I think they probably would have gained another little bit of time on the straights. But I think Max today was in a different league, and who's shocked, right? Pressure's on, championships on the line, Max is going to deliver, this is what he does. So I feel like a Max pole today was somewhat inevitable. But the question is, could anyone else get in the mix? Because Ocon, Tsunoda didn't even bother with a lap, as we know. Hadjo, Alonso, Bortoleto made it through, which is a good result. But really it was about, could Russell do any damage? Because Antonelli was also knocked out in the previous session as well. Leclerc somehow was actually a factor here, which is remarkable. Russell then came up with an idea to say, if Max goes out nice and early, then after he's done his lap, put me out behind him, I'll get a nice toe on Max on his in-lap. That would have worked had Max gone out with about 3 minutes to go, but Max doesn't like to do that. He wants to get the last lap in, and that's pretty much what he did. So there was no time for him to give any help to Russell later in the lap. Speaking of Russell, he was given it everything, right? We saw this a couple of times. He comes around the final corner. He was within the ballpark of the McLarens, but he had a huge moment in the final corner. Probably cost him a tenth and a half, 2 tenths, I would say, just because the line was quite shortly afterwards. So it was a big deal. It didn't cost him pole or anything. But it may have stopped him getting right up there with the McLarens. But this was, in the end, the pole position time for Verstappen. A 1:22.207, went even faster on his final run. But I thought Norris's lap was really good in the circumstances because, lots of pressure on, really, right? There was pressure from George. Piastri did, I think, a great lap as well. They both put in a good performance. And to see it be Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, the 3 title contenders right there at the front is pretty mega. Russell will be frustrated because if not for that final corner moment, if not, he felt like he could have been on pole or certainly close to it. But it wasn't quite to be in the end. And that's really big for Lando, especially, and for McLaren, because Russell is now, he could still be a factor. Turn 1 tomorrow, who knows? But Russell's not going to try anything crazy turn 1 tomorrow. If he was P2 and Norris was P1, then yeah, Russell may well send a dive bomb down the inside because he wants to win the race. But Russell isn't going to win the race in P4. Very unlikely. And it's unlikely he gets a chance at turn 1 to make any sort of remarkable, moves forward happen, right? So I think Russell will have to be relatively patient in tomorrow's race, which obviously helps Norris as well. Leclerc then is P5. He did a great job getting to P5, I thought, in that Ferrari. Alonso, Bortoleto, Ocon, Hadja, and then, as I say, Yuki was sacrificed. Zach Brown, Lando, they come over to congratulate Max Verstappen because, he has done the job that he needed to today, as did Red Bull. Yuki got into Q3, helped him out with the toe. But it is still Max against the world tomorrow, right? Try as he might, he needs to win, and he needs Lando to be 4th if he wants to win the championship. And on today's evidence, that is not necessarily going to be happening. So what is the plan for tomorrow, right? That is, I guess, the key question then for Max Verstappen, because if I'm Lando Norris, I'm loving this. I think if I'm Lando, I'd prefer to be seconds than first. If I'm Lando on pole and Max is seconds, I'm incredibly nervous going into turn 1. Do I try and cut across him like what happened back in Las Vegas? That didn't go to plan. Do I yield? Because effectively, you know what Verstappen's doing if he gets the opportunity on the inside of turn 1 in Abu Dhabi. He did the same last year, and well, what he did last year resulted in this incident where both Max and Oscar were spinning out of contention and Lando went on to win without too much difficulty. So, that's a scary prospect, right? If you're on the inside of Max Verstappen, or Max is on your inside turn 1 when he absolutely needs to win the race, I think Norris should be very happy with this because Max will get away well. Norris doesn't have to do anything crazy. Don't send a crazy, unless Max has a terrible start, in which case Lando can go for it. But Lando just needs a solid start. Max, okay, fine. You go ahead, lead the race. Oscar, is he going to do anything drastic turn 1? Like Max did from 3rd place last year? Probably not, because if Piastri takes out Norris and, they have a collision like in the Austin sprints, Max goes on to win, then Max wins the championship, but Oscar doesn't. So for Oscar, today is, I wouldn't say a crushing blow. He did well, but Oscar would have really loved to have been 2nd and then Russell 3rd or something and Lando 4th. That would have been great for Oscar. But because then he could have maybe, overtaken Verstappen and all of a sudden the title might move in his favour. but that's not happening, right? So Piastri, he can't risk a load down the inside of turn 1 because what's the point? He's not going to win the championship anyway if he has some sort of impact with Norris, and obviously the team wouldn't be happy either. So Piastri has to be, I think, careful turn 1. The fact that Russell is 4th means that he's probably not in position to do too much damage. So I don't expect much to change in the opening lap or so. What I do expect, however, is Verstappen to start playing some games, because look, this is what's brilliant about Max being a contender here and Red Bull, because they will try whatever they can, whether that involves making Yuki do a long stint or whether that, I don't know, like, I'm sure they're going to put Yuki on the hard tyres. They're going to leave him out long just in case he can potentially interfere with what's happening further up the field in terms of pit stops and holding up Norris after he pits, whatever the case is. But Verstappen may be forced, I'm intrigued to your thoughts in a comment, to do some sort of Hamilton 2016 type shenanigans when he wasn't going to win the title, so he was backing up Rosberg, right, to try and see if anything would happen further back. I can see something like that happening. Russell, however, needs to be in a position, right? Because, you know, Verstappen needs Lando to either DNF, some sort of crash or engine failure, whatever, with potentially crash with Piastri or something, or he needs someone else to get in the mix. Russell's race pace, the Mercedes race pace, didn't look all that special on Friday. In fact, from a race pace perspective, Max and the two McLarens look very even. So from that perspective, you might expect Max to just run away with it and win easily. But of course, if Max just drives away and the McLarens are 2nd and 3rd, then he doesn't win the title. So Max will have to play some sort of a game. I don't know if he's going to do an Alonso and put an absolutely massive DRS train into effect, but if he does, then, you know, Norris will be under pressure, right? Piastri will be right behind Norris. You might have Russell right behind him, Leclerc in the mix as well. Norris would be under pressure. What if someone sends a dive bomb down the inside? You know, that I think will have to be Max's plan, depending on how the race plays out, of course. But yeah, Max is not going to give up easy, right? He's not just going to drive off and be like, okay, well, I won, and whatever happens behind me happens. If he can find a way to help himself by making things a bit dramatic and complicated, then he will. I mean, he says we need a bit of luck from what's happening behind, but then he also says, let's see what we can do, right? So I think when he said that, I was like, he's cooking something. He's definitely cooking something. Look, Lando's the championship favourite. I think just enjoy the race, you know, like enjoy the season we've had. It's been a great season. Some of the races have been fantastic. Some of them haven't been anything special. The cars don't race very well, as we know. But to have 3 drivers all in contention on the final day in the season, still realistically enough, anything could happen. Yeah, I think we've had a good season, and hopefully it ends with the best man winning tomorrow. And no sort of artificial manipulation in Abu Dhabi, as we have seen before. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.